active citizenship, an active global citizenship. It means to promote and enhance the diversity of cultures, and it prepares citizens to act responsibly in the construction of a fair, just world, peaceful, and sustainable world. But even the investigation studies are quite clear on the benefits on the interconnection between culture and education. Sometimes we have seen that those two topics have been developed separately. UNESCO has been preparing the path to enhance the nexus between culture and education by providing culture and arts a key role in all programs, parts, and educational systems at a formal and non-formal and informal level. The need of integrating arts in education has been emphasized in two world educations. On arts education, specifically the roadmap of UNESCO on artistic education, which was adopted in Lisbon in 2016, and the Seoul agenda as well, where we focus on the specific goals on artistic education. Under these two different conventions, we have added specific concepts and the position of UNESCO and the different members of UNESCO in relation to artistic education in order to define the main goals and objectives to enhance quality education and to show the diversity of cultures and to promote human rights and the importance of access to cultural aspects. There are three main points that help us find and strengthen the link in between culture and education. We have one document, which is the vision paper, which provides some guidelines to promote the nexus in between culture and education so that we can promote quality education with equity. In a second document, which is still under review, we have started a review process for the global framework for culture and arts education, which aims to expand the frameworks on education on a, or arts education to add culture, the patrimony, different cultural activities and institutional activities by also adding digital transformation and artificial intelligence and how to include them into cultural and education. And there's another consultation process taking place on the recommendation on 1974 on education in global peace and education for human rights. And it's a quite a long title, but it also highlights the recommendations that have been added or adopted to enhance the nexus once again of culture and education. As part of a connection between these two topics, is that we can easily adapt it to different local contexts. It should be actually adapted to different local contexts. And our panel members will be sharing some concrete examples on how to do so. And they will probably refer to methodologies that are specifically used at local level, at a formal, informal, and non-formal levels. So with us, we have three great speakers. One is coming from Peru, from UNESCO Peru. We also have the Ministry of Culture of Cuba and the Ministry of Culture, Arts, and Patrimony of Heritage, sorry, of Chile. So they will be talking on the different intercultural aspects and the contribution of arts and heritage and, and education. This will be quite an interesting conversation where we will all learn a lot. I will now give the floor to Adriana Padron Garcia. She's Director General for Artistic Development and Education from the Ministry of Culture of the Republic of Cuba. She'll be talking on how culture and arts inclusion into the education has actually transformed the society. Ariana has 7 minutes to present. I thank the organizers for this roundtable on a new vision of education and culture. I'm very pleased to be sharing my thoughts and ideas with all of you, especially while thinking on the crisis of several phases, cultural, environmental crises that we have never seen before. I will specifically talk on the Cuba experience. It is important to highlight the access to culture and education has been since the very beginning a priority for all different sectors of the population. We were able to massify arts, and this does not necessarily mean a reduction on quality. On the opposite, we started with a specific campaign so that we promoters within several institutions and share specific examples from the CAI, the Casas de Cultura or culture houses, the national theaters, all these different institutions were at the very beginning of the institutional training that really create the pathways and led to the promotion of arts within education. Fidel has it pretty clear. Culture and education nexus is key. When people are actually able to understand the surroundings themselves and understand without manipulation, you can actually expand knowledge. The institutional basis was created so that we were able to provide better conditions for promotion for people, citizens to have access to quality arts, cultural activities. We were able to integrate, interconnect both areas, and we believe that those are the ways for emancipating human beings. Probably one of the largest challenges we experience at till this point. Cultural policies, an open cultural policy, a flexible cultural policy through the revolution has guaranteed sustainable public policies with an emphasis on educational culture so that institutional structures can be strengthened while creating a center of transformation in the core of the communities. Fidel said that culture has to be preserved because that's the main core or the identity of the peoples. Talking about identity and culture are also topics that are interconnected and they show the originality of its people. This has been the key stone cornerstone of we have been preserving the history, heritage of people is the way of resistance. The best antidote for different stereotypes we're facing that enhance fascist, homophobic comments And the solution to all this is to promote an authentic culture and emancipatory culture. We are putting all our efforts to enhance structures, existing structures. We have been working long on arts education. This has been part of the process that we have seen at different school levels. If we talk about social transformation and social impact, it is key to refer to what Cuba has been sharing throughout these years. How the school is actually the center of cultural development within a community. It's easy to say, but not so easy to achieve. Art educators, since the very beginning of the revolution, were trained and they had access to an arts education quality. And we have art schools. It's a very good example. We have more than 37 art schools around the country. Those provide access to the masses because those guarantee access of quality. We also have the ballet schools with such a high level technical expertise that it's the house of our Cuban ballet. We have more than 300 of casas de cultura, which are the very basic centers that reflect communities activities where we have cultural promoters working hard at the community level. They guarantee the connection with the communities. Another example I would like to share with all of you is a specific comprehensive program for community assistance. We have seen in enhancements in support of the government aiming at enhancing and transforming the community. Our schools, our promoters, all different stakeholders, the different projects arising from a specific need, help solving art and educational issues. How this comprehensive approach allowed us to create a stronger link and changes lives and ways of understanding different processes. Human beings are the main center of all these different processes, and communities are the spaces where everyone articulates and they create with the support of public policies. They create community internal processes supported by museums, libraries, the casas de cultura or cultural houses, arts galleries. All these different institutions are part of the community. To be able to enjoy and have access to all these different institutions provide us the possibility to have a movement of artists. We have more than 18,000 youth, teenagers who are prepared and trained within our arts schools. A university of arts that is connected with transformation, changes in our society, and committed also to support research centers. More than 60 years of education and culture nexus, all these arts promoters I was mentioning before, they work in have the support to develop different programs on music, visual arts. They work together to build up a well-being, the well-being of humans as a whole. We will come back to all these different comments when we move on to your questions. Of we all know that Cuba has, of course, a strong process of connecting culture and education. Cultural infrastructure, educational infrastructure has been enhanced since the very beginning of the revolution. I would like to invite now Angela Bravo, the management and advocacy specialist from Horizon Programs from UNESCO Peru. And she's going to be presenting a project which has a strong intercultural approach, which has been now implemented in Peru. Angela. Thank you, Cecilia.
También quienes están por la tarde muy bien participando de este simposio. Es un gusto desde Perú poder compartir
It is a pleasure to share with you from UNESCO Lima, Peru.
queríamos traer el día de hoy en la mesa. Voy a compartir algunos slides
And I'll be
sobre lo
sharing
que
some
pretendemos
slides
proponer
so
con
that
esta
you can
visión,
have a
cultura,
better
educación
idea
básica
of
y
what I'll
nueva,
be
y
talking
poder darles
about
información
today and
general
what we
de todo
cover
lo que
within the
pretendemos
program.
transmitir en esta intervención. Así que si me pueden confirmar que ya podemos ver los slides y que todo está bien con el audio
Se
para
puede
estar
ver.
listo.
Si me pueden confirmar que,
Muchísimas
if you can
gracias.
confirm that you're seeing my
Déjenme
slides.
primero un poco de marco de cómo trabajamos en el Perú, el
So I'll share
proceso
with you the
de
framework, how
integración
we
de artes
work in
escénicas y
Peru,
cultura
the
en nueva
integration of education and
perspectiva en nuestras
arts
actividades
education
diarias en el Perú, igual que en
in
Cuba. Como bien
regular
saben, en Cuba
activities.
tenemos una larga data de educación
Like
original
Cuba,
y
we
educación
have been
cultural,
working for a long time
integrada
here in
dentro del
Peru
área de artes.
in this
El
nexus
país
between
tiene
education
un
and
curso de arte y cultura en todas las
culture.
escuelas, es un curso obligatorio
There's
en nuestra línea curricular
a class of
básica. Y
arts
esto se
that
trabaja
is
en
part
distintos
of our school
segmentos
programs in all
educativos.
schools in the
Este tipo
country.
de formación en sus aulas, sin embargo, todavía es insuficiente, dado que
Of
el
course,
curso tiene
this
únicamente 2 horas
class
diarias en las escuelas
is
y los
2 hour
estudiantes
long
no tienen
each
suficiente
week,
carga
so
curricular
still
porque es un
insufficient.
docente de primaria general el que suma las horas de arte y cultura. Entonces, si bien tenemos en la formalidad la
So,
universidad de nuestra línea en
formally,
Perú,
we have
tenemos
access, generally, access to arts and culture in schools, but still, there's still much to be done at the level of teachers training in order to generate change and social change throughout the country in another dimension. In Peru, we have a lot of work in establishing the nexus between education and culture. We've been working with First Nations in order to promote their culture and rooted in communities, also with Afro descendants. We've started in the 1980s a program in order to offer a curriculum, bilingual curriculum, in order to promote culture and education throughout the country with children's. We've been also developing this approach in primary schools, but it focuses and focused mainly on language as a right of indigenous people to access schools in their original language, uh, both on the cultural education dimensions. We've been working with community calendars integrated to the daily work of those communities. We're still at the first moment of this approach, integrated approach, in rural schools where we have teenagers, for example, with bilingual culture, but haven't been adopting those approaches so far. So in 2018, we started this program, which is called Horizons program of UNESCO, how we can develop the pertinently an approach in towards rural teenagers has been the main focus of our program. And we have also developed a strong approach on cultural identity in order to support their development and their identity, their social development, integration to society, and establishing a nexus with communities. So, of course, we're confronting the situation of migration of rural people towards the cities. We need to magnify the culture of those communities in order so they stay in their localities. And we're facing a situation uh, where they migrate to the cities where they're confronting many challenges to integrate themselves and obviously trying to recover the culture and background, their identity. So we launched this program in 2018. We have working in the north of Peru with those horizon schools. We work with different arts projects, ceramics, in zones where traditional nations like Wampi. We are also present in the Amazon region with and also in the mountains in Cusco with the Quechua communities with Estarwa community also has also built its own traditional heritage. So we're also in the zone of Arequipa with Quechua region. So we have a holistic approach in different regions of the country where we're trying to connecting different realities of teenagers in different regions. We developed two actions that are complementary, that are linked with the development that we really are consider as the basis to drive forward an approach of integrated approach between education, really related to the social and emotional development of teenagers. We've have 8 schools with approaches, with intercultural approaches, where we will work on culture and theater, arts, different ways of uh, training teenagers in order to be closely linked to community needs. We work on education. We occupy those spaces, offer different classes based on the approach of human capital, but closely linked to an emotional development also in order to promote social change and social transformation. And we're trying to focus on traditional values for communities, and also work on the emotional need based on their personalities and identities. So the communities are defining their needs depending on their context, background, and what is the value to culture related to those values in order to land those in practices throughout activities uh, uh, integrated in art development. We have poetry, uh, narratives, visual arts. We have different forms how children can develop those their talents. In 2021, we also launched a program on sexual issues, trying to develop a new approach based what we called artivism, and it's how we trying to attract their interest on those all those issues. Here's pictures in the region of the Rio Santiago and 1P communities where we work in intercultural programs, but also based on artivism. We're trying to develop that approach on sexual knowledge with specialized technical assistance uh, uh, that really creates synergies in through arts expressions like theater and other. The other uh, end of the spectrum, we have uh, different components of that approach. What we call social training, that related to also industrialization and development of communities. But we're trying to take into consideration the rural reality, its potential, and save and bring it related to educational approaches in order for students to be able to really fit into their concrete environment. This bringing together the life in community in order to take advantage of this and how amplify and magnify those realities. We work on sustainable development, on traditional agriculture, organic traditional agriculture based on their heritage and knowledge. We are also building on the works on metal. We also have sarwar painting and also food industries. I'd like to uh, last minute for you, Angela. The experience of the Sarwar College, which is in the highlands of Ayacucho, where we work in those schools, we developed a module in order for families to articulate with students in an intergenerational dialogue through the Sarwa heritage that really represents the tradition of Sarwi. So a part of the curriculum of that school, we're implementing the creation of arts based on Sarwa heritage and establishes the nexus with the community and elders in order to transfer knowledge from generation to generation. This program has gotten a lot of strength over the past few years. And in order to value this development, this identity, this art, energy, and synergies, in order to overcome any conflicts in their rural context, but also overcome those conflicts in order to develop their identity in those rural regions. So that's what I wanted to share with you with the approach we're trying to develop in our communities. Thank you so much, Angela. It's quite interesting, this concept of artivism. Uh, we'll come back to this and also talk about the impact of this work on the value of the training and all the talent that has been emerging throughout this program. And finally, we have a third panelist, Nicolas Del Valle Oriana, who is advisor for international affairs, the Ministry of Culture, Arts and Heritage of Chile, who will present what are the contributions from the arts and cultural heritage for transformative education in that dialogue between education and culture. Nicolas, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Cecilia, for the invitation. Thank you so much to the UNESCO team and the chair of the UNESCO chair. Thank you for this dialogue between education and culture. Today, in order to respect the time allocated to me, I'll try to share with you key messages, and then afterwards engage in that dialogue between my colleagues. There are three moments: the programmatic, the standards, public policy at the level of integration of education and culture. A second element is the history of Chile as a country and the efforts that we've been deploying as a country in that dimension, and also the concrete contribution of that nexus between education and arts and heritage. I would say the first thing to highlight for the people listening to us, the international agenda in public policy in the sector of education and culture. They exist at the origin of the creation of UNESCO and United Nations. There was a convention of experts in order to reflect on that nexus and the role of arts and education in general. At that moment, they were reducing arts to music, and at this presently, they concentrate the support mainly their support to those two disciplines, music and theater. And after 1977, there was a concept of a learning process throughout the life, conditions related to the artists. In the 1980s, they incorporated the concept of education. Education in the arts was a key moment in those in that process. 1979, there's an universal declaration where education is highlighted. There's also the convention and the conference, the global conference on artistic education, the agreement in Lisboa, in Lisbon. There's many stages at the international agenda that really brings the slowly but progressively the integration of arts in the education. And there was also a shift in the rhetoric on culture and its relation with education and how it can support us at the level of emotions. But there's also a displacement where there needs to be a nexus in order to have a process of transformation. In 1946, there was an approach towards primary, secondaries, but then we're entered a phase where quality education needs to integrate culture and arts. And the public policy approach, yeah, and su centro, is its core. We don't only refer to the trajectory of life, but also the acquisition of learning and a trajectory that starts from the primary schools or preschool, primary, and eventually go to secondary school and post-secondary education in South America and Colombia, for example, how we've focused on elders and how they can play a role in that processes in order to transfer knowledge and create that intergeneration relationship. It goes throughout life, and there are many modalities, not only through formal education related to the role of schools and education and public policy throughout the curriculum and school program, but also recognizing the non-formal education that can be planned, that can be linked to official curriculums, and at the third level, how it doesn't need to be related to educational institution formally, but can obtain their specific spaces, like in the Caribbean, through a museum or recreation centers, and also in concretely in the indigenous communities, how to create those cultural spaces, and also how those specific spaces become educational spaces. So the educational public policy has been focusing mainly on formal education, but we need to recognize that informal education in order to promote culture. So the cultural policy needs to focus on the nexus on between informal and formal education and arts. And there's also the learning processes that happens in homes through transfer between generation, between fathers and mothers towards their children, that really relate to colors, flavors, senses, and really brings about how we act as citizens in society, and probably calls for additional investment in those spaces, and how the narrative in the museum needs to reflect that kind of learning and really recognizing those informal spaces. So there's an approach, and it needs to be itinerant, moving throughout the space of societies. And the last stage is really emotional and personal, that needs to inspire public policy. And in this sense, it relates to the question of how education is also a cultural practice, and goes through traditional heritage. In this sense, how we need to recover the spaces in cultural practices towards formal spaces of education. In this sense, I believe, between the nexus between education and culture, we need to de-standardize culture, and we need to create openness of its pertinence in society, create long-term spaces to create those spaces in order to concretize this nexus, and, and a greater nexus between citizenship and educational practices. When we incorporate culture in education strategies, uh, and is how to identify a long-term strategy in the schools in order to foster integration. This is the global background.
Yo diría que lo primero que habría que constatar, y con esto yo ya voy
I'll
acercándome al
say that because of time, I will probably sum up. Chile has a long trajectory of around 15 or 20 years on education and arts and heritage, and we have been actually celebrating lately and have worked on a campaign with several activities country-wise, where we share several activities at the university, technical schools, institutes. We have also created fora with UNESCO, with collaborative diagnosis taking place. There's a collaboration with the Ministry of Education in order to work on a specific public policy on arts education, heritage policies, education on human rights, an intercultural approach on education, and also how to enhance libraries and book usage. So this is somehow connecting the efforts of the government for more than 15 years in relation to the nexus between culture and education. And I will end up with this note. Why is it so important to link? Because identity,
la valoración de la libertad creativa de la
human
sociedad.
sensitivity, creativity, social justice, global citizenship, environmental reflections are enhanced, but also concrete knowledge, ideas are shared. And that's important to highlight. Learnings are improved. They're not only related to arts, they also relate to different fields, human, arts, math. So it's not only values, activities, but there are specific modalities that are already appearing, whether we like them or not, but are educational criteria, pedagogic aspects we're including now. Artists in the classroom, there's now different ways of approaching education with senses. We're going beyond disciplines, we go beyond music or visual arts. We are also enhancing cognitive behavioral learnings, and we are sharing and learning
Eso diría por este lado.
by doing learning, by sharing. And I hope that we can have a fruitful discussion. Now, thank you. Thank you, Nicholas. I think we have several questions already in line, but there are three very rich experiences and quite concrete experiences on how these three different countries have actually invest with success, I may say, on this nexus and the interconnection that it also relate values and what Nico just actually shared, all different aspects that we are experiencing nowadays. And I would like to start with a round of questions, and I will start with a question to Ariana. And I have also questions for Angela and Nicolas. And I also see that there are questions that have been shared in the chat. Adriana, I would like to start with you. After all the background and the history you have shared with us on how Cuba has actually approached the nexus between culture and education, what are the mechanisms that Cuba have in place to continue sustain the strong presence of arts and cultural education? 2 or 3 minutes, please. We have programs in place that support the different experiences that I've shared with you. Programs and projects that, with the support of public policies, articulate all the different experiences of the ministries and institutions. All these different programs come together and elevate the quality of different activities that take place at the community level. The decision making processes of different aspects of life, social life of citizens, and included within the support of institutions, we accompany the whole process. Will that answer your question? Yes. How these institutions actually support the social cultural behaviors that are created within those art scenarios or spaces. It is a constant dialogue with curricular activities that are reflected at the very end at the community level. Those centers that articulate the main institutions, right? The libraries, the museums. Create programs that enrich the process. For instance, we have social identity programs that include, for instance, access to different social services and how we work on social prevention, vulnerabilities of youth, teenagers, children at that level, that specific age where we actually take care of their development and we probably improve their life by enhancing and providing those services. We also have a specific risk groups and how within these art scenarios with the art institutions with the Montaña plan, for instance, we have a specific program to support jails, minority vulnerable groups with cultural activities. So we have the support of the national program up to 2030 that is related to the UNESCO agenda. We have worked constantly together. We have public policies that support the whole experiences. And since I have been saying we have been doing this for 60 years already. Yes, the public policies and culture and education, both ministries, right? They work together, as you said, as complementary way in general terms. Great. I have a question for Angela. Let me ask the question. It's pretty similar to the one that I have prepared actually for you, Angela. I would like to know, how do you cover the different issues related to free time or cultural aspects that could probably create some sort of hindrance on the process that you share and the previous knowledge and competencies? I think that there was a question that I think I had somewhere over here on how were these competencies being certified or approved? You have a few minutes to respond. Thank you, Cecilia. I'll try to integrate the two questions so that I can try to cover the time. So one of the first steps that the program took was what we call a social license with the communities. So the first step actually to work on the implementation of this program is to talk to each of the community members, educational communities, the parents and students, and like to explain them that they will be part of a program, a 4-year program at this first stage, and we need to share with them which were the points whether we had to agree on or where there may be some other issues open that will probably be discussed later on. There were discussions on, for instance, gender issues. We know that our es- um, communities are quite traditional and they do have a very differences between the roles of female and males, and how we were able to get a common ground so that the rights and integrity of human beings will be beyond those specific beliefs or thoughts. So we started with the social license and we work independently in each of the communities where we saw, for instance, gender issues because of gender violence associated issues, or because we see a very different approach related to the content provided and arts. What's really interesting and important throughout the process for youth, especially at high school level, especially at rural areas or at community levels, the whole uh, courses related to sexual education is key. They have lots of questions, of course, on how to take care of themselves and their bodies and sexuality as such, and the exploration on sex ed. And as I mentioned in the presentation, activism was a key. The youth were able to decide which were the topics they want to discuss and cover, and they were the ones transmitting the information via arts, artistic performances, or they were writing stories, imaginary stories and showing examples of whether they could talk about those topics with their own families, and they even use their native language to share those stories. Some do not necessarily speak Spanish, and they were able to share the information via performances through their parents. They sometimes do not see the need to go to a school, premises, different to the probably urban areas where you go to a specific place. Sometimes what they did is that in an open space at the community uh, space, they were performing, sharing their ideas on sex ed. So basically, this was a different way of communicating to the community, trying to fill out those gaps identified, showing the vision of the use of communities and how they interconnect with the tools that were shared at the schools. So they were using speeches and presentations
este diálogo, poniéndole voz del adolescente a su
were
protagonista.
different to what they learned, and they were able to build up their identity and share both their traditional knowledge, but also include the approach of development and also their work new on different issues such as sex ed topics. In, in relation to the content, the communities were able to decide, they decided which was the curriculum they wanted to develop. The family, the parents were able to share their comments, and so then teachers from arts who were helping in their region come back to their community so that they create the models together with the families, and they try to adapt with the knowledge, the local living knowledge of a community where they probably share within the family, but they work on this whole process on trying to use the official curriculum in Peru with the local community knowledge within exchange of the community members. And it was interesting to see how they were able to revitalize knowledge with the national curriculum. Oh, of course, there were some resistance, right? We need to try to help them to think out of the box and try to work harder on the value of what it means to bring the discussions to talk about heritage. Material and immaterial heritage and how they value heritage in their spaces. Of course, even communities were not aware of those specific issues. Some parents were far away from the reality, or they may not necessarily share the same thoughts. So we were working a lot on intercultural dialogue, trying to understand the people who were resisting to those changes, but also trying to promote and enhance and value identity and also the rights of the youth. They have to, of course, look at the links of their communities, but also enhance their own project of life, and their own professional pathway. So we try to mix up both different paths. It is interesting to see the results at the very end of the project and how this actually impacted the community, right? When you are saying that you're valuing competencies or skills that were not necessarily actually seen by the community can be interesting. Nicolas, I think there's a question that we have seen. We have 8 or 9 minutes left to finish this whole roundtable, but let's move on to Nicolas. How does Chile faces the issues related to authorism and the dictatorship that you experience? You talk about the memory, right? And I think that's quite an interesting topic. How they are dealing with those specific points. It is quite challenging. We will be celebrating 50 years of the coup d'etat next year, so it is important to bring up this topic. And through the different initiatives, plans, and programs at the cultural and educational levels, we were able to try to highlight our history, but not in a direct fashion, but actually indirectly, while trying to prepare material or booklets that use arts of the those years, but with the new administration and within our own context of those these days, the Ministry of Education is working on changing the program on human rights, and of course, the community realities and activities are run probably faster than rules or laws. Of course, we already have seen those activities arise, and even before we had a plan on human rights, you have the educators, teachers who are going to guided visits, informal training that takes place while sharing
para que hayan visitas guiadas.
topics of memory related stories to sites that have been prepared. It is existing. There is a cultural and educational non-formal practice that comes from the communities. So what is missing is to try to collect and enhance those processes and try to provide a strategic orientation at the long run that will actually create a larger social impact. It is not only learnings, but it's also creating awareness of our recent past and the different implications of it so that we do not bring it back and that does not happen again, and create a peace and human rights link where we understand that citizens are subjects that will avoid conflict but will look into dialogue. And I think that's probably the overall vision. But if you ask me to concrete tools, well, those are already being seen at the territory level. So we have material, educational materials, site bases to intercultural exchanges in between formal educational centers and museums or memory specific facilities. But we also have this idea now of this large public policy that will probably guide all these different efforts, and that will probably lead to plans, specific plans. So the celebration of the 50 years will be used probably as a catalyzer in order to implement this type of actions. That will be briefly my answer. Thanks. Thanks, Nicolas, and thank to the three of you. I think now we cover the time that we had left, but there is one question for the three of you. Since we need to end this session, maybe we can just share it to you, and you can just ask to Alejandro, or sorry, answer Alejandro's question directly on the Agenda 2030 and the role of education and sustainable development, and how you are promoting those specific guides within the society, and that may probably cover the challenges of the agenda, or at least will identify solutions. I would like to thank Adriana, Angela, and Nicolas for your presentations, for sharing with all of us your experiences, quite interesting experiences, and we definitely have lots of things to learn from them. Those are experiences that we would love to share because this is part of your work and how you're integrating culture and nature. And yes, there are so many experiences in different countries, and we hope that these will definitely show the impact, a positive impact on culture and education, educational culture and nexus, and how they both transformed our societies. Thank you once again. Thank you to all participants, those who are listening to us. Let's keep in touch, and let's keep on reflecting on this nexus. Thank you to you all. Thank you as well. Thanks.